So the hardest part of dealing with harmonic motion and word problems is going to be dealing with, of course, the words. So we kind of know what amplitude is, and that's going to be how far away from the origin point or the equilibrium point the object can possibly go. Because remember, if we're thinking about sine and cosine being kind of this upward and downward cycle, that the amplitude is going to be kind of the furthest away that you can possibly get from your 0 point. So period. Period is exactly like it has been for the rest of this. It's going to be how long it takes for the object to displace both upward and downward in a full cycle. So in other words, this is how long it takes our mathematical model to get through that full cycle. Because remember, that does change based on those phase shifts, which shift horizontally right and left. And then we also have that change based on that omega, so that multiplication on the interior. Now, what really gets, or kind of throws most people off, is picking between sine and cosine. Because, you know, sine and cosine, when you really think about it, they have a relationship. In fact, on the last homework, you would have played around with this and seen that there was a relationship between sine and cosine, where in fact, given some information about sine, we could create a cosine function and get the exact same values. Now, the way to pick between these is, since sine of 0 is equal to 0, so in other words, at time 0, sine is equal to 0, it's safe to assume that in a word problem, if the mass is released from its origin point, so in other words, at time t equals 0, then the mathematical model will use sine of t. So in other words, if we release from our equilibrium point at time 0, then we're going to be using sine. However, since cosine of 0 is equal to 1, so in other words, at time t, which would be 0, our value would be 1, it's safe to assume that in a word problem, if the mass is released from anywhere else in the motion cycle, that cosine of t is going to be used. So sine of t is when we would release our mass for harmonic motion from the origin point, and then cosine is when we're going to be using the anywhere else in this motion cycle. Usually this is going to be at the amplitude. So we'll go from the very, very largest point and then let the mass go, and then let the harmonic motion go from there.